We're beginning chapter 18 of The Ultimate Evil by Maury. Hunted, stalked, and slain. John Carr may have been dead, but his ghost haunted the investigation of the murder of Arliss Perry. Berkowitz specifically said Carr wasn't involved in her death, but he did link her killing to the North Dakota cult scene in this manner. "Don't worry, because I didn't commit this crime," he wrote Lee Chase in November 1979, "nor was I present when it was done. Back in October 74, I was busy and at work at a piss-poor paid security guard. I was here in New York, but, and I say but, in my travels with different people in this area, I met someone who was involved in her death and spoke freely of the slaying, bragging. He knew many details, and I know that this guy, Manson number 2, doesn't bull. I know he killed often, him and his crew, cult. This is what this new investigation was going to rest on. You are a natural detective. Can't help at this time but notice the strange coincidence here. Many months ago, I inquired about Arliss Perry. If you'll note your paper news clip, she hails from Bismarck. Bismarck is just south of Minot. Minot is the second focal point of this investigation next to Yonkers in Westchester County. This is why I mentioned her to you as compared with the multitudes of other murders of young women. Why her? Simply because I knew beforehand where she lived once. Also, I knew it was a cult thing. Berkowitz had told Santa Clara detectives Kahn and Beck that he met Manson II at a cult meeting in New York. He told Chase the same thing. I was at first thrown off by Manson II's statement, since it appeared to contradict Berkowitz in another way. He said the man and his cult killed often, and he also said Arliss was hunted, stalked, and slain, followed to California. If that was so, and the answer to the murder or the motive lay in Bismarck, then where were Manson II and the cult? Then where were Manson II and the cult doing all these other alleged killings? As Berkowitz himself wrote, North Dakota boasted an extremely low crime rate, and murder was a relatively rare occurrence there. For quite some time I was troubled by this problem. Then a source very close to Berkowitz straightened me out. The seeming contradiction was actually a clue, as was the name Manson II. For a moment I will get ahead of the story to explain the significance of Manson II, as stated by the source whom I will call Vinny. Manson II wasn't from North Dakota, Vinny said. He was from the LA area. That's where the Sam cult has its headquarters. The North Dakota branch wanted Arliss dead, and they called California for help. Figures. Shit, I lost my place. Damn, I really lost my place. Fuck. Manson II wasn't from North Dakota, Vinny said. He was from the LA area. That's where the Sam cult has its headquarters. The North Dakota branch wanted Arliss dead, and they called California for help. Manson II went north to Stanford to arrange it. At least one, maybe 2 people from Dakota came out to help, but it was Manson II's show to run. He was involved with the original Manson and the cult there in LA. That's why Berkowitz used the name as a clue. This information was so overwhelming that it was first hard to believe, but Vinny wasn't done. This guy was an occult superstar. They used him for the most important jobs. Berkowitz met him in New York because he was imported from the coast to participate in the Son of Sam killings. He's the guy who shot Christine Freund in the Son of Sam case, and he was around for some of the others. He was back and forth, but he did Freund, and was in New York for, I think, some of the later ones. Are you telling me a guy involved with Charlie Manson and the original cult in California arranged Arliss Perry's murder as a favor to North Dakota and then came to New York for Son of Sam? That's exactly what I'm telling you, Vinny replied. Then why is Berkowitz trying to help you solve the Perry case? Because he believes Manson too was the guy who had the most to do with picking him to take the fall on Son of Sam. He hates this guy and fears him, so he wants the Perry case broken for a personal reason. He may have a conscience these days, but he's got more on his mind than just trying to be a good citizen, Vinny said. And you got this from Berkowitz himself, directly, face to face. According to Vinny's statement, the Sam cult was headquartered near Los Angeles, and the head branches of Bismarck, Minot, Houston, and New York at least. And these branches and others I'd learn later shuttled killers and contracts back and forth. If any of these statements was true, any of it, it would rank the entire case as one of the most significant criminal stories of all time, bigger than the Son of Sam case already was. Berkowitz, Manson, and the process. Jesus. Oh, crap. Okay. Manson and the process, and its cells set up around the United States. The network already in place, and then the splinter groups spreading off from the process. Among them, the Chingongs and allied elements of the OTO, and all of them linked as parts of an underground web of murder. How bizarre was this charge by Vinny, who said he was repeating Berkowitz's statements to the letter? It should be remembered that Arliss Perry was murdered on the 5th anniversary of Manson's arrest, a day which was also the birthday of black magician Aleister Crowley, whom Berkowitz had already tagged as an inspiration for the cult. Further, Arliss Perry's death occurred during a period when elements of the Manson crowd were very active. Lynette Squeaky from Me would attempt to murder President Gerald Ford in Northern California sometime after the Perry murder. Berkowitz himself admittedly joined the cult in New York in 1975, just 6 years after Manson's arrest, and less than a year after Arliss Perry's killing. And as for the process Chingon groups, it was already established that a network was in place. Process members using the name Process and mingling with existing OTO factions were seen openly in New York City as late as 1973. The time frame fit. Moreover, it was already established that long connections existed between the Minot and New York cults. All Vinny was doing was extending the pattern to Los Angeles and tying it together. Vinny's comments were first made to me in 1982, more than 2 years after Berkowitz first wrote about Arliss Perry. Unknown to Vinny, his statements were consistent with what Berkowitz had said in 1979. Vinny and Berkowitz didn't meet until 1981 in prison. Berkowitz, in other words, told Vinny the same story he'd written about in 1979. The difference was a simple one. In his conversations with Vinny, Berkowitz filled the details he only alluded to in 1979. The initial step was trying to learn if Berkowitz was telling the truth about his knowledge of the Arliss Perry case. If he was, that fact alone would once more demonstrate the existence of a Son of Sam conspiracy via the back door. That is, how else would alleged lone killer Berkowitz know confidential deaths about the murder of a North Dakota girl in Stanford, California, a murder which he insisted was committed by a satanic cult, and a branch of his cult at that? Santa Clara detective Ken Kahn publicly stated that he was convinced Berkowitz was telling the truth about the Arliss Perry case. It's about the best information we've had, Kahn said. I think it's a very significant lead. I put a lot of credibility behind it. Before that, Khan explained we interviewed about 250 potential suspects, and it led us nowhere. I believe Berkowitz knows what happened. Berkowitz was very connected with his credibility on the Perry case. It will be remembered that he didn't want to jeopardize his standing on the matter and thus requested that Lee Chase not send any items on the case to Santa Clara or elsewhere for just that reason. Another letter he wrote Chase during this period, mid-November 1979, further illustrates Berkowitz's mindset. If anything reaches this guy in Staten Island, Gilroy, or the sheriff from North Dakota on this case, then they'll laugh at me out of sight. The investigation will close immediately on receipt of such a clipping. Obviously, they will say hoax, sham, con artist. If you recall, several months ago, and long before you knew of this current 44 investigation, seemingly out of the blue, I asked about Arliss. You wrote back asking me how I heard of this particular case, since it was strictly a West Coast news item. You acknowledged the fact that this didn't make it to the East Coast, at least not in the New York City area. You're absolutely correct. I never read about it in any New York area paper. Neither did I see it in a detective magazine. This is the whole case in a nutshell. The fact that I didn't read about her or her murder is good evidence. 2 weeks ago, I sent this guy, Gilroy, a 4-page typed letter. 1.5 pages dealt with Mrs. Perry. Actually, there isn't too much more, if even this much that I know about the case as far as facts go. I know who did give it and why. But I'm not going to mention this to anyone, not give it a name. I just discussed with him the case. Here is the problem. Gilroy doesn't know that I have a newspaper clipping on her. You sent it to me, remember? It was a brief clip from a California paper devoid of any detail, and this is the most important point. I questioned you first about Arliss, and to your surprise, you only sent one clipping to me, only after I mentioned her to you first. Now, if you were to send a clipping to Gilroy or North Dakota about her, then he'll, without a doubt, think that I'm giving him bum information. He'll think that I'm trying to lead him on a wild goose chase to get attention for another crime I'm trying to confess to. So please don't send anything on her case. The case is reversed for me. If she should get a bunch of Perry-related clippings at the same time that I'm writing him about her, then I'm screwed 100-fold. This guy is the attorney for Midigar and Terry. These two were the ones who managed to get photos of me in Kings County. They believed about this Sam Carr because, in the literal sense, if you know what I mean, everyone else thought I was deranged. They didn't understand what I was trying to say. This whole investigation here is because of these three. Gilroy is unknown to the public. He's never been in the papers in reference to this investigation or the Son of Sam case. He's not after publicity. Being that Gilroy is thorough, I'm certain he is now checking the New York area newspapers to read about the Perry case. Ha! He'll never find it. This will surprise him, and he will investigate this thing further. Gilroy knows that I had an abundance of clippings about the killings. Next, he'll contact the Queen's DA to ask him to look in my collection for the Perry articles. Hence, no articles are in my large collection on Arliss. He meant no articles on Arliss were in his collection. Now he will realize he is on to something. Understand? How did Berkowitz know about this? I can't I can't see how he heard of it. Maybe he isn't bullshitting. So please don't send any photos of these two, Gilroy and Gardner. Let me remind you again that I contacted you first about this, but he won't know or believe this. Unfortunately, I don't know much more than was released in the newspapers, West Coast. No, he will never believe I knew of the case before I read the clip you sent me. Berkowitz did in fact query Lee Chase about the Perry case first. In a letter dated June 8, 1979, asked Chase if he'd ever heard of the case and next hinted that Arliss Perry was a true Christian, in fact not included in the brief clip, then sent him the next week. In replying to Berkowitz, Chase asked how he could have heard of the case. Berkowitz answered with another tidbit that didn't appear in the newspaper articles. She sure was a skinny little thing, he added later. She was so tiny. Both these assertions were true. I gather the Arliss Perry murder has never been solved, he wrote before receiving the clip from Chase. He was right, of course. Also, before he received the short clipping, he spelled Arliss's first name correctly, with one S, but after getting the clip, which incorrectly added a second S, he abandoned his original accurate spelling and took up the erroneous one. The Arliss Perry case and Berkowitz's allegations were primarily investigated by me, with assistance from Gardner and Jeff Neese. The Santa Clara police provided some help, as did Santucci, but Santa Clara investigators never returned to North Dakota to mount an investigation. Their reasoning was that the case was now old, but if Berkowitz gave up information, they'd be there to follow it through. My first interest was in establishing just what knowledge Berkowitz had, which he couldn't have possessed if he was lying. And we're to a picture section. Some of those involved in the cross-county hunt for conspirators above Queens, New York, District Attorney John Santucci, Lieutenant Terry Gardner, North Dakota, Center, Mike Knoop, North Dakota, Jeff Neese, reporter, Minot Daily News, below, Jack Graham, reporter, Minot Daily News, Petrie, Minot Daily News. Ooh. Michael Carr and his sister, New York Times, top photo. The death auto driven by Michael Carr, October 4th, 1979, Westchester Rockland newspaper. The Devil's Cave at Untermeyer Park, Yonkers, scene of satanic rituals, top photo and middle. Important page from witchcraft book marked and smuggled out of prison by David Berkowitz. What does the writing say? Arliss Perry hunted, stalked, and slain, followed to California. The shade of Aleister Crowley looms large in the area, but he excesses pale into insignificance compared to today's devil worshippers. Wow. Okay. Millionaire producer Roy Radin at 1980 arraignment in Long Island, New York. Top photo. Foul play funeral. The headlines told of a mysterious disappearance in Los Angeles. I'm not sure what it reads yet. Tally Rogers vanished from the West Coast after an alleged $1 million cocaine cash burn. That was the man on the left. Woman on the right, Elaine Jacobs traveled in show business circles in a limousine allegedly used for a last ride. Bottom photo, a dirt road in desolate Caswell Canyon, north of Los Angeles, 1983. Beehives are a road's end and a body was found nearby. Maury Terry. At a murder scene, this Bible was opened as shown to Isaiah 22. Maury Terry. The inquiry showed the Manson headlines told only part of the story. Sharon Tate, Mr. Manson. Woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil sends the beast with wrath. Let him who has understand reckon thy number of the beast, for it is a human number. It is a number. Its number is 666. Frightening satanic warning found at a ritual site, 1985. I just read it, so you gotta read it. Wrath was misspelled. What else was misspelled? Sea was, no. Woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil sends the beast with wrath, which was misspelled R-A-T-H. Let him who has understand reckon the number of the beast, for it's a human number. Its number is 666. Yeah, so 2 misspellings. Millionaire art dealer Andrew Crispo, dark hair at the center, refuses to answer reporters' questions at a 1985 murder trial. Bottom picture, Bernard Ligueros is led from Rock Island County, New York courthouse in late 1985. That's it for pictures. Before seeing a brief news clipping Lee Chase sent him, he knew Arliss was a teenaged girl, and that she was killed in a church at Stanford. He knew that these are numbered, so that was number 1. Number 2, he knew from the outset that she was a true Christian. The clip Chase later sent him didn't contain this information either. Number 3, he knew she was tiny, skinny, and pretty descriptions that were not published. Number 4, he spelled Arliss's first name correctly before adopting the incorrect spelling in the small clip he received. Number 5, he knew the case wasn't solved as of 1979. I'd have known if it was solved, he wrote. The lone clip Chase sent him was a short Associated Press item from 2 days after the murder. No photo of Arliss accompanied the piece, which was dated October 14, 1974. Number 6, he knew Arliss liked to frequently take walks around the Stanford campus, an unpublished fact. Number 7, he accurately described the purple, scarlet, and gold interior of the Stanford church at the time. Number 8, he knew the exact location of Arliss's stab wounds behind the ear. Some local San Jose area papers did write that Arliss was stabbed at the base of the neck or skull. Berkowitz was able to pinpoint the precise location, which had been withheld from the public. Number 9, he emphasized the hideous torture Arliss endured, and indicating knowledge that went far beyond any newspaper account. Number 10, he knew that Arliss had an interest in cults. This was a non-published fact, confirmed to me by several of her friends in Bismarck. Her curiosity was that of a Christian wanting to know about the other side. Number 11, he knew that Bismarck's Mary College existed. Maury was a tiny school that neither we in California nor the California police have ever heard of. Number 12. He connected the Maury College to cult activity in Bismarck and to Arliss's death. It was firmly established that a satanic cult met in a wooded area right below Maury College during this period. Number 13. He alleged in this letter to Felix Gilroy that prominent, respected people were involved in the cult. Witnesses in Bismarck stated just that. Number 14. He saw a photo of Arliss that apparently was not published anywhere until 1981, 7 years after her death and 2 years after he sent a photo of another girl out of prison saying that girl looked just like Arliss. Almost a twin sister, he wrote. He was right. Number 15. He said the murder was a cult killing and not a random sex crime. In Chapter 1, unpublished details about Arliss's death and the position of her body, etc., appeared for the first time, along with the fact that Arliss's grave marker was stolen in Bismarck 2 weeks after her death, near Halloween. Also, that Santa Clara authorities heard from Bruce Perry's parents that Arliss may have attempted to convert members of a Bismarck cult to Christianity. Number 16. He wrote that the murder was planned and not random. In Chapter 1, the confidential details about the law firm visitor appeared along with other information, which strongly suggested Arliss purposely went to the church the next night, the evening after her intense discussion with the law firm visitor. Arliss, it will be remembered, didn't tell her husband about the encounter at the firm. Number 17. If Berkowitz known, named accomplice John Carr and his cult branch were nearby in Minot at this time, why couldn't Berkowitz know confidential details about the Perry murder? Indeed, as he wrote to Lee Chase, why her? Simply because I knew beforehand where she once lived. Also, I knew it was a cult thing. In the investigation of the Perry case, I personally conducted more than 40 interviews with Bismarck area police and friends, family, and associates of Arliss Perry. Numerous sources were interviewed several times. Jeff Neese and Lieutenant Terry Gardner also questioned several people, and Minot officer Mike Knoop provided logistics support. The Santa Clara Sheriff's Department at the time of the killing didn't interview any of Arliss's close friends in Bismarck. So convinced were they that the killer or killers were California psychopaths. Then in 1979, despite their belief in Berkowitz's veracity, they sat tight. With the exception of fresh interviews of Arliss's parents, Bruce Perry and Bruce's parents, we, however, decided to act. Here is the picture which emerged. In 1971 through 1973, a Northern California-based cult, which claimed it wasn't satanic, materialized in Bismarck, the capital of North Dakota, a small town with a population of 36,000. There were 6 representatives of this cult group in Bismarck. They wore black clerical garb, but adorned their necks with red collars and ribbons instead of religious white collars. Remember, members of this sect rented a home in Bismarck directly across the street from the residence of Arliss's grandmother. Arliss visited her grandmother regularly and may have contacted group members in that way. At least 2 young women Arliss knew actually became involved in this cult. Arliss herself, according to 2 associates, expressed an interest in learning about the group. One said he was almost certain Arliss attended one of the cult's meetings. These statements about Arliss's interest in learning about the occult and numerous other comments which also detailed her innocent curiosity, confirmed Berkowitz's allegation. At the time of the killing, the Santa Clara Sheriff's Department heard from Bruce Perry's parents that Arliss and a girlfriend had once gone across the river to Mandan to try to convert some members of a satanic cult to Christianity. Girlfriends of Arliss told me she did indeed visit a Mandan coffee shop where members of this group were recruiting from, eventually barred the cult members from her establishment. I spoke to that former owner, who is now a minister in Ohio, and he confirmed the story. I then located one of the cult's members, who left the group and now resides in Kansas. He stated that while the group did try to recruit from that coffee shop and did hold meetings in a rented home across the street from Arliss's grandmother's address, they weren't satanic. He did acknowledge, however, that his former cult espoused mysticism, astrology, and the tarot. He also said that he'd encountered members of the process in Chicago, but that his group wasn't connected to the process. We remain unsure of this non-satanic claim, and have also considered the possibility that members of the process or Chingon cults infiltrated the other group or falsely represented themselves in Bismarck as being members of it. But there was another definitely satanic cult operating in Bismarck during the 1972 through 1976 time period, at least. Some sources, including police officers, say it is still active today. Significantly, this secret group matched Berkowitz's statement exactly. It was holding its midnight meetings behind Maury College. The cult's existence in a wooded area behind the school has been confirmed by at least 10 people, including police officers, area residents, nuns who taught at Maury College, and other Bismarck citizens who were involved in Christian activities. Importantly, the letter's sources belonged to the same religious organization as Arliss did, Young Life and the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. One nun who taught at Maury College told me, "My students knew all about it. They said the cult used to kill dogs back of here. We have a large cross in the graveyard, and the devil worshippers used to creep up the hill to spit on our cross." Berkowitz, in the satanic book he sent to Gardner in late 1979, underlined the following sentence: "They must be prepared to defile his image and spit upon the cross." The married couple, who lived in a trailer home near the cult meeting site at Maury, told me that they saw torches and heard chanting, and that 3 of their pet dogs were abducted in the middle of the night and later found mutilated inside a circle of stones, a magic circle. This couple also said that only one. Oh, damn, why do I keep adding one? This group also said that the only access to the cult meeting site was via the Maury campus itself. The Apple Creek, blocked access from the other direction. They were holding their rituals near an old shed in the woods. The only way to get there was by a trail that led down from the campus. The cult also met at Hillside Cemetery, as well as behind a Catholic church and a Bismarck synagogue on infrequent occasions. As mentioned, police officers and others knew of Maury cult's existence, as did Arliss Perry. A friend from the Fellowship of Christian Athletes said she definitely knew about it. We discussed the cult several times at our FCA meetings. Arliss's pastor, Reverend Don DeCock, said, "I knew about it and might well have mentioned it to her." DeCock offered another important observation. right at the time of Arliss's funeral here, either just before that day or the next. One of my parishioners was awakened before dawn and saw a man wearing a black cape trying to break into the church. Arliss's grave marker was stolen less than 2 weeks after this incident. DeCock also said a friend of one of my parishioners went down to Maury and hid out on a hill one night to spy on the cult. I never found out who they were, but she said there were some well-known Bismarck citizens in attendance. This provided another confirmation of Berkowitz's statements about both the Maury group's existence and his assertion that prominent citizens belonged to it. A further confirmation came from Mandan Police Sergeant Lamar Kruckenberg, who said in early 1974 an undercover cop was brought to an indoor cult meeting in Bismarck by one of his informants. He was looking for drug activity. There was no suggestion of murder at this time, which was about 7 months before Arliss's death. This cop told me the people there were wearing masks because there were supposed to be some respected Bismarck people among them. The undercover officer left the force several years later, and we were unable to locate him. Closer to Arliss herself were two male acquaintances, both of whom were said to be occult adepts. A girlfriend of Arliss said of one, he was always trying to invite us girls over to his basement for seances with black candles. Another friend of Arliss recalled he carried a Satanic Bible around with him. During the interviews, the names of several people suspects emerged, including at least 2 successful Bismarck citizens said to be connected to the Maury cult. One young woman also said, right after the murder, a month or so later, I heard that the cult here contacted the California group, and that's how it was done. No one but Santucci, Sergeant Kahn, in Santa Clara and I knew of this Berkowitz-Vinny allegation, which wasn't made until the early 1980s, and was kept secret. Yet this woman volunteered that identical information to me in December of 1985, saying that she heard it shortly after Arliss's death, occurred in October 1974. Her statement was a powerful one. When the interview began, I told each contact that we were looking for a bridge, someone who have had cult contacts but whom Arliss felt she could safely approach to satisfy her curiosity about the subject. Arliss, the investigation clearly showed, was a sincere young Christian. We found no dark corners in her life. She lived at home, attended school, and socialized with her religiously active friends. Shortly before her marriage, she worked in the dental office of Bruce's father, Duncan Perry. Duncan Perry was a prison dentist. Inmates from the nearby state penitentiary were brought to his office for treatment while Arliss was there. It remained possible that something which occurred in that setting could have offered a motive for her death. But beyond that possibility, I wanted to establish the means by which this young girl from the right-hand path could have learned about the left-handed path, the cult scene at Maury. I reasoned that since Satan cults don't advertise in the newspapers or have open attendance at their midnight meetings, Arliss would have sought assistance from someone she thought she could trust, but someone she also knew was connected to the seamier side of Bismarck society. I also knew that Arliss was aware of the cult's existence, but we had to discover that bridge, beyond which we hoped lurked the motive for her murder. At least 3 young men and 2 young women were identified as the result of this approach. Any of them, the sources agreed, could have linked Arliss's world with that of the Maury cult. Since the investigation is open, I am not at liberty to discuss specifics concerning these people, but I can say that all were in positions which provided ready access to the Maury cult operation. This evaluation had been corroborated by the Queen's DA office and Sergeant Kerry Kahn of the Santa Clara Sheriff's Department. In previously listed items concerning Berkowitz's knowledge of the Perry case, I referred to a photograph of another young woman which he sent out of prison saying it looked like Arliss's twin. When I received this picture, I thought Berkowitz was hallucinating. It looked nothing at all like those of Arliss Perry I had seen. At the time of her death, the pictures which appeared in the media were shots taken of her in high school. In each she had straight blonde hair, wore glasses, and had no makeup on. The picture Berkowitz likened to her, however, was that of a young woman who had carefully styled curly hair and who was wearing makeup. Also, this woman wasn't wearing glasses. In no way did she resemble Arliss Perry. Berkowitz sent this photo on October 27, 1979. 2 years later, on October 24, 1981, the San Jose Mercury News published a photograph of Arliss Perry to accompany an article about Berkowitz's involvement in the case, portions of which I'd make public a month earlier. This photo of Arliss looked exactly like that of a woman Berkowitz likened to Arliss in 1979. I was stunned. The newspapers said that the picture was the only one of Arliss in its file, and that it was a wire service photo they apparently obtained from the 1981 story. We must have ordered it from Bismarck, I was told. Bismarck. Arliss's parents, sister, and girlfriend studied the picture at my request. They identified Arliss, but said they'd never seen the photo before and couldn't remember her ever looking as she did in the picture. Without the glasses, I'd say it was taken in her first and only year of college here, Arliss's mother said. It was readily apparent Berkowitz had seen that picture, but where and how? In the witchcraft book he mailed to Lieutenant Terry Gardner in October 1979, Berkowitz wrote of a satanic ceremony which involved a detailed soliloquy directed at the victim, describing her, Arliss Perry, annihilation. Here he was clearly referring to a cult meeting in New York at which he said Manson too told of the Perry killing. Apparently it was through this dialogue that Berkowitz learned many details, including the extreme tortures performed on her. It is my opinion that Manson too had this photograph of Arliss in his possession at the time and showed it to Berkowitz and others present. If so, where did this superstar satanic killer get it? Arliss, as the picture showed, was dressed and made up as if posing for a formal photo session. Her family, however, said the picture was not among those taken of her engagement announcement, her wedding, a prom, or a similar event. Arliss's parents and the Santa Clara detectives also said no such photo session occurred during her brief time in California. But since Arliss spent only 6 weeks of her life in California, and the San Jose newspaper said the picture apparently was obtained from Bismarck, the hunt was focused there, and it produced some results. There was a young man in Bismarck who frequently followed Arliss around, taking pictures of her. Arliss was invited to his house to pose for photographs on several occasions, some taken there or elsewhere she liked well enough to display in her room at home. On one occasion, Bruce Perry and this young man got into an argument when the man called Arliss and invited her to his house to pose. Bruce, in the presence of Arliss's parents, grabbed the phone and told the man to stop bothering Arliss. But Bruce was always at Stanford during Arliss's freshman year at Bismarck Junior College, which was the time period in which her mother believed the mysterious photo was probably taken. No evidence directly linking this man to the Maury cult has been uncovered, but several people said a close friend of his was very interested in occult practices. However, it is distinctly possible that a photo he'd taken of Arliss was somehow obtained from him and passed to the killers for identification purposes. Then another print made from the similar or same negative could have found its way into the files of the Associated Press or Bismarck Tribune, which shared the same building in Bismarck. Regardless of whether this individual was actually the source of the enigmatic photo, the picture itself is key to the Perry case. Another bizarre and frightening clue in the Arliss Perry case came from the hand of Arliss Perry herself. Arliss's own words offered dramatic testimony of the event pre-planning involved in her murder. On September 27th, 1974, 15 days before her death, Arliss wrote a letter to her close friend Jenny in Bismarck. Jenny and other Dakota friends of Arliss were not interviewed by the California police. In the letter to Jenny, Arliss wrote, "I had to laugh about your call to Bruce Perry. Mrs. Perry, Bruce's mother, made the same mistake. She called them too. But the strange part of it is that his name is not only Bruce Perry, but it is Bruce D. Perry. And not only that, but it is Bruce Duncan Summer. One thing, his wife's name is not Arliss. Anyway, next time you get the urge to call, the number is. This time I guarantee you'll get the right Bruce Perry." A question. Was it plausible to believe that there were two Bruce Duncan Perrys studying at the same school at the same time, both of whom had just been married? There were not. But someone had taken out a phone in that name, and since Arliss was able to recite all that information, she almost certainly talked to that man. Apparently, with the influx of students arriving for the fall semester, Arliss and Bruce had a considerable wait until their phone was installed. When Jenny and Bruce's mother tried to reach them, they spoke to an information operator who gave them the listing of another Bruce D. Perry at Stanford. It would have been a university area exchange number, since both Jenny and Mrs. Perry would have told the operator that Bruce and Arliss were living on campus. "I asked for Bruce D. Perry at Stanford," Jenny recalled. Both then called the other Bruce and were told they had reached a wrong number. Of course, this information reached Arliss as a note in her letter. Arliss apparently then took the natural step of calling the other Bruce to tell him where she was living and to give her phone number after the unit was installed, so that if he received another wayward call, he could give the caller Arliss's correct number. But now the other Bruce, the false Bruce, who would also possess Arliss's phone number and almost certainly her address. If he'd anticipated any difficulty finding her, his problem via the fraudulent telephone listing would have been covered in advance. Through this method, the victim could eventually find him, just as Jenny and Mrs. Perry did. What was it Berkowitz wrote about Arliss? Hunted, stalked, and slain, followed to California. The phone listing of a non-existent Bruce Duncan Perry was a vivid portrayal of the hunted allegation, and regarding the word stalked, it will be remembered that Berkowitz knew the unreleased fact that Arliss frequently took long walks around the campus. In fact, she wrote her parents that Bruce was discouraging her from roaming the area alone. But how did Berkowitz and the killers know of her walking habit? The answer would appear to be that Arliss was followed, stalked. Interestingly, her regular walks ceased by September 30th, 12 days before her death, because on that day she began working full-time at a Palo Alto law firm. For Berkowitz to have known she took long walks around the campus, the killers would have been following her before September 30th, which meshes with the false phone listing being in place by mid-September. I didn't learn of the fraudulent Bruce Duncan Perry until I interviewed Jenny in December 1985. Her husband, reading Arliss's long-stored letter, thought the telephone incident might be relevant, and Jenny sent me a copy of it. A subsequent check with Stanford University by both me and Sergeant Ken Kahn confirmed what we already knew was true. There was no other Bruce Perry at Stanford, let alone another Bruce Duncan Perry who'd just been married. Another inquiry, this one with the telephone company, led nowhere. Records that weren't in existence, but we did learn that the other Bruce, whose published number the information operator had in September 1974, wasn't listed in the new area telephone book that was distributed several months later. In and out, the other Bruce was gone. The plan, while ingenious and chilling, was simple to enact, with an appropriate deposit and a false name. It wasn't difficult to obtain the listing, and why not? It is apparent that Arliss was hunted and stalked for several weeks. The idea that Arliss Perry eventually spoke on the phone to one of her own killers is horrible to contemplate, but no other plausible explanation for this unsettling chain of events has surfaced, except for the possibility that the listing was obtained in a demonstration of sheer macabre arrogance and omnipotence. The existence of the phone listing, which wasn't discovered until late 1985, melded with other information I possessed since 1980, when a source of Minot reporter Jack Graham told me she had heard that the Perry killing involved someone registered at Stanford under a false name. The lead was impossible to pursue then, but now its import was established. The information was basically accurate, but it applied to a bogus phone listing, not an actual registration at the school. The source said she had picked up the story from the cult crowd in Minot. Reviewing the Perry investigation results, Queens Homicide Bureau Chief Herb Leifer said, if Berkowitz was lying, none of this information could have been confirmed. It wouldn't even have existed, and far more information than he spoke about was uncovered. It looks like he knew that once you turned over a rock and started digging, you'll find what he always knew to be there. If after examining the broad scope of evidence and confirmation, one believes that Berkowitz was telling the truth, then one has to decide that conclusive supporting evidence of a Son of Sam and much larger conspiracy to be uncovered. Numerous questions about motive remain. Berkowitz wrote that one existed, and the entire idea of tracing her to the coast and planning her slaying also demonstrated that a motive lurked somewhere. She could have been killed simply because, as an ardent vocal Christian, she was an automatic enemy of the cult. Its leaders may have ordered her death to provide underlings with an example of their powers and prowess. But to have committed the crime in Bismarck, where the murder was a rarity, would have been too obvious. The cult, whose existence was known, would have come under immediate suspicion, as would have a number of Arliss's acquaintances who had the means to bridge her world and that of the group. But after Arliss reached California, the killing could be accomplished because, as did happen, the search for the murderer would be conducted there, not in Bismarck. When I interviewed Arliss's friends, I asked each the same question. Pretend for a moment the killing occurred in Bismarck. Who would the suspects have been? Of course, the cult immediately mentioned, as were Arliss's acquaintances, who had contacts on both sides of Bismarck society. Returning to the question of motive, Arliss also may have tried to convert to Christianity a cult member who later returned to the group and perhaps acknowledged that he or she told Arliss certain details the cult deemed confidential. It is also possible she inadvertently learned the identity of a respected citizen involved in the group. A large amount of drug trafficking was occurring in Bismarck during this period, and one does not have a satanic cult without drugs being in evidence. Somehow, in her explorations, Arliss may have stumbled across some knowledge of the group's drug operations. There are at least two other possible motives, neither of which can be mentioned publicly, but as Berkowitz alleged, the investigation found that motives for Arliss's murder did indeed exist. Arliss did not appear to be fearful. Her letters from California revealed a young woman who was occupied with adjusting to her new life and interested in what was happening in her hometown. Her correspondence contained no concerns for her safety or indications that any noteworthy troubling matters were left behind in North Dakota. Combined with her serious discussion with the law firm visitor the day before she died, her failure to tell her husband about it, and her unflinching desire to walk to the church alone the next night, it appears that Arliss was set up by someone close to her, someone she didn't fear. This evaluation was also based on a comment in Berkowitz's letter to Felix Gilroy, in which he said that identifying her hometown would solve the case. That statement strongly suggested that someone obvious and close to Arliss was involved. The Bismarck cult assuredly had more than one leader. It is possible that one of them was a local educator, because Berkowitz, in pointing to Maury College, also dropped several clues about professors, including teachers, people who relocated to the Bismarck area from Southern California in the early 70s, would be worthy of scrutiny because the Bismarck cult would have needed contacts in Los Angeles to enlist the headquarters group in the murder plot, as alleged by Berkowitz and the prison informant. Several such people did settle in Bismarck during those years. Two were young men who were said to have been involved in narcotics distribution and connected to three Bismarck men who spent considerable time on the coast. The California natives lived in a rented crash pad known locally as the Hippie House. That was the scene of numerous drug parties in Bismarck. Curiously, the Hippie House was said to have been located at the same address later occupied by the California cult group that recruited in Bismarck between 1971 and 1973. The house across the street from Arliss's grandmother's residence. As two final notes, 7 young men whom Arliss knew were identified as matching the general description of the law firm visitor. But since no police sketches of that man were drawn, it wasn't possible to show a rendering to Arliss's friends. Also, it was mentioned earlier that Arliss's jeans were placed with their legs positioned on her own spread eagle legs in a manner that resulted in a rough diamond-shaped configuration, though it isn't certain that was the intent. A study of Mary's college yearbooks revealed that a diamond logo appeared on some official school sweaters. The Arliss Perry murder investigation remains open. Bit of a shorter one, not by much.